everyone, and welcome to COVIDCon 2020. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the first speaker of session one, Dr. Sayyada Farkhunda, a final year medical student from Deccan College of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad, and she will be speaking on viral infections, their history, and general considerations. Over to you, Farkhunda.
Wishing you all a very good day. This is Sayyada Farkhunda, a final year medical student from Deccan College of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad, India. It's my pleasure and honor to talk before each one of you, and I'm very thankful to my mentor, Dr. VIJAY for having given me this opportunity. I would now like to start with my first topic of the day, the origin and evolution of viruses, the biological enigma that goes to the heart of inception of life. It was about 4.54 billion years ago when Earth was formed. And the earliest undisputed evidence of life on Earth dates from at least 3.54 billion years ago. Life remained mostly small and microscopic until about 580 million years ago, when complex and multicellular life arose and developed over time. An estimated of 10 non-million, that's 10 to the 31st power, individual viruses exist on this planet. Enough to assign one to every star in this universe 100 million times over. But most are not poised to hop onto humans. The mammals and birds are alone thought to be a host of about 1.7 million undiscovered types of viruses, a number that has spurred the scientists all over the world to survey the Earth's wildlife for the cause of our species' next pandemic. While human beings mark the pinnacle of evolution, viruses have streamlined successfully, jettisoning all but a handful of essential genes. Being made of a few short strands of DNA and RNA wrapped in a soft protein shell, viruses infiltrate every aspect of our natural world, seething in the seawater, drifting through the atmosphere, and lurking through the minuscule motes of soil. When exploring the evolutionary history of most organisms, scientists can look at the fossil records and similar historic evidence. But since viruses do not fossilize, researchers can only hypothesize about the viruses and know their evolutionary history by investigating the biochemical and genetic information of how the modern-day viruses have evolved. There have been three main hypotheses that have been articulated, and they are as follows. The progressive hypothesis. This hypothesis states that the mobile genetic elements or the genetic elements capable of genetic material capable of moving within the genome gain the ability to exit one cell and enter another. They are then integrated into a new location in the genome of the new cell. We can then speculate that the acquisition of a few structural proteins could allow the whole element to exit and enter a new cell, thus becoming an infectious agent, a virus. Analysis of the retroviruses as infectious agents strongly supports this hypothesis. The regressive hypothesis. It is also known as the reductive process. This theory states that viruses may be descendants of more complex ancestors. According to the proponents of this hypothesis, autonomous organisms initially developed a symbiotic relationship. And over time, the relationship turned parasitic as one organism became more and more dependent on the other. As a once free-living organism became more dependent on the host, it lost its previously essential genes, and eventually it was unable to replicate independently, and thus it became an obligate intracellular parasite, a virus. Analysis of the giant Mimi virus strongly supports this hypothesis. The virus first hypothesis. The progressive and the regressive hypothesis both assume that the cells existed before the viruses. But what if the viruses existed first? Several investigators have proposed that the viruses may have been the first ever replicating entities, and it is thus postulated that the virus may have existed in a pre-cellular world as self-replicating units and over time became more organized and complex. Eventually, enzymes from the synthesis of membranes of the cell wall resulted in the formation of cells. Therefore, we can draw a conclusion from this that the viruses may have existed for the bacteria and the other eukaryotes. However, to date, there is no clear explanation for the origin of viruses. Continuing studies may provide us with clearer answers, or further studies may reveal that the answer is even murkier than it now appears. Let's move on to discuss the general characteristics of the viruses in a very brief manner. Viruses lack the cellular organization. They are the biological entities that do not have a cellular structure, and therefore they lack most of the organelle components of the cell, such as the organelles, ribosomes, and the plasma membrane. The viral nucleic acid. Viruses have only one type of a nucleic acid, that is either the DNA or the RNA, and this viral nucleic acid is encased in a protein coat. These molecules contain all the genetic information of the viruses and all the genetic codes that are required for the synthesis of proteins to produce new viruses. The simplest viral nucleic acid can encode up to about 4 proteins, and some viruses also have enough DNA or RNA to encode up to about 100 to 200 proteins. Viruses as obligate intracellular parasites. This term surely means that the viruses must carry out reproduction by parasitizing a host cell, and they cannot multiply outside a living cell, and they can replicate only inside a specific host. Viruses as metabolically inefficient entities. The genetic information necessary for the viral replication is contained in the viral nucleic acid, but they lack the biosynthetic enzymes, and therefore they take advantage of the host cell by hijacking the cellular machinery in order to replicate. And one of the confounding features is the presence of an ordered enzymatic environment to perform the necessary events for replication. The complex process of replication of viruses. Viral replication is a term used to indicate the formation of biological viruses during the infection process in the target host cells. And the purpose of the viral replication is to allow reproduction and ensure the survival of its own kind. And this is done by generating abundant copies of its genome, and these copies are then packaged into viruses, and thus the virus will be able to continue its progeny and continue infecting new hosts. Let's talk a few things about the viral mutations. A mutation is a change in sequence of the DNA or the RNA, and the mutation rate of an organism is defined as the probability that a change in the genetic information is passed on to the next generation. The frequency of mutation in viruses is very high, that is 10 to the power of minus 4 to 10 to the power of minus 8, which means that the mutations can occur during every viral infection. Some mutations are also very lethal, and a mutant becomes evident only if the mutation confers some readily observable property of survival advantage. Mutations can occur spontaneously or may even be induced by chemical or physical agents. Now let's discuss one of the most significant property of the viruses as infectious particles. Viruses are the smallest infectious agents. The viral infections have a broad spectrum of effects ranging from no apparent cellular damage to cytopathology with accompanying cell death to hyperplasia or even cancer. Infectious diseases are ever present in the society, and every once in a while there may be an outbreak due to a new strain or a new disease that has a significant impact at either a local or a global level. Now let us know what they call at each level. Let's start with the endemic, N meaning in, endemos meaning people. It is a term used to describe a disease that is present at an approximately constant level in the society or even a country. For example, the Caribbean dengue by the dengue virus in the Caribbean islands, chickenpox by the varicella virus in the United Kingdom, malaria by the Plasmodium species in Africa. Let's move on to know what is called as an epidemic. Epi meaning upon or above, and demos meaning people. It is a term used to describe a situation where a disease spreads rapidly to a large number of people in a given population over a short period of time. It is a term not only used with reference to infectious agents, but also used with any scenario that leads to a detrimental rise of health risks within the society. For example, the rise in obesity. Epidemic in reference to an infectious disease. It is due to the sudden rise of cases, usually resulting from a new infectious agent or a change in the infectious agent. Epidemics follow a very predictable pattern, and these trends are often used to monitor, predict, and control the spread of the infection. A typical example of an epidemic is a seasonal flu. Now let's move on to currently widely used term, the pandemic. pan meaning all, and demos meaning people. It is a term used to describe the rapid spread of a transmissible or a communicable disease over several continents or even worldwide. It is a term used in reference to rate and distance of the spread of the disease and not the severity of the disease. It is often caused by a new strain of a virus or a complete new virus, and it spreads quickly in humans as there is little to no existing immunity against the pathogens. I would now like to conclude by quoting a few notable examples of the pandemic in the past. The Black Death pandemic due to the bubonic plague, which and this illness tore through Europe in the year 1347 and lasted till 1351, and it claimed the lives of 25 million people. The influenza pandemic, about which my colleague Dr. Lameez will be talking about in the coming presentation. The smallpox pandemic, which spreads over hundreds of years, killing 300 million people in the 20th century alone. And thanks to the widespread vaccine use, it was declared eradicated in the year 1980. Last but not the least, the reason why we all have gathered here, the COVID-19 pandemic due to the coronavirus, with 34.5 million cases and 1.02 million deaths as of today. I would now like to thank each one of you for having paid attention and giving your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Farkhunda, for that succinct presentation.